Kingscreek is a horror podcast, and thus the content in this episode may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
You are now entering Kingscreek. Episode 1, Roadkill.
Okay. Right. So, welcome to Unnamed Podcast, Episode 1. Yeah, sure. I'm Damien Bachman, and this is me reading through my uncle's old stuff. That is not a good intro. Maybe I should start with some background. My Uncle Mark got his master's degree in parapsychology back in the 90s and then moved out here with my aunt. They lived here for, I want to say, 15 years before he died. It was a stroke or something. I never got the details. Anyway, according to my aunt, when he wasn't with her, his time would either be spent wandering around the woods or the town or up here in his study. Once he died, she never touched this room. Said it wasn't her place. 2 years go by, blah blah blah, enter me. Since moving up here with her, I've had a lot of time on my hands, and I've been spending a lot of that time up in my uncle's old study, going through his old files and things. There's a lot of real wacky stuff here. I don't know if he was actually doing any real research up here, or if he was just writing science-themed horror fiction. Anyway, since he bit it, it's all just been gathering dust up here, so I figured, why not catalog it into a fun little podcast thing? Preserve his legacy or whatever. Could be fun. The file I thought I'd start with is really interesting. A lot of these are collections of other people's eyewitness accounts, but this one is almost entirely my uncle. Its label says, Case A95, Serial Roadside Phenomena. A real eye-catching title, eh? Well, let's see what you think of the actual story. October 24th, 1997. I've been taking a lot of walks as of late. Ever since I was a young boy, I've always found that taking a walk is the easiest way to clear my head. And recently, I've had a lot on my mind, so I've needed to clear it a lot, so to speak. It also helps that this is not an unpleasant town to walk through. The fall air has a pleasant chill, and the neighborhood is perfectly picturesque. It's like walking through a mid-century, fall-themed postcard. It's not just the houses I walk past, though. There's a road that I like to walk down, Gossamer Lane, that cuts through the woods. The part that cuts through the woods isn't very long, probably like 100 feet or so, but it's enough that when you're there, you feel like you're in another world. The trees sway back and forth from the breeze, and the whispers of the leaves drown out any sounds from civilization. It's very peaceful. Or at least, it used to be. One other important detail to note is that this forest is almost entirely oak. Northern red oak, specifically. According to my research into the town's history, this is not accidental. The town's founder, Emanuel Sorensen, was a bit of an amateur arborist and purposefully seeded the forest with red oak to create some kind of consistent pattern. This fact always stuck out to me. An interesting quirk of the town's founder is an easy conversation starter or icebreaker around here. So it struck me as odd that one of the trees by the patch of the road was birch. A very unsubtle birch, too. The white bark stood out like a sore thumb among the dark red sea of the forest. I could never figure out what species of birch it was either. It didn't seem immediately distressing or harmful though, so I filed it away as a potential oddity to explore later. Now though, something has been happening. Something interesting. It started about 3 days ago. I was walking down the wooded section, lost in my thoughts as usual, when I saw something on the road. Something that wasn't moving. Now, I'm no stranger to seeing roadkill. It's an unfortunate truth about our car-dependent society that a certain number of animals will be killed by collisions with or being run over by cars. And that's especially prevalent when the road is by a forest where animals tend to hang out. But it's still upsetting. When I got there, I kneeled down to examine the body. It was a rabbit. I won't go into too much detail, but it was safe to say that it was definitely dead. Poor little thing. It reminded me of the rabbits I would see outside my window when I was a boy. They always seemed terrified of whatever was lurking around the corner, even if they were all alone. Still, I couldn't sit there looking at a rabbit corpse all day long. I made a mental note to come back with a shovel later and was just about to leave when I looked up at the trees. I stopped. The rabbit was right in front of the singular birch tree. It was exact, too, not like it was in the general area. No, it was perfectly aligned with the trunk of the tree. This wasn't enough for me to be scared or anything. Coincidences like this happen all the time. They're usually not a sign of something paranormal. All this would really mean would be that it would be easy for me to find the rabbit when I came back with the shovel. But even so, it was somewhat disquieting. Afterward, I walked back home, greeted my wife, and then immediately took the shovel and went back out. The image of the rabbit lying on the road was still fresh in my mind, and I didn't want to put this off. The walk back seemed quieter somehow. It was later in the day, sure, but we're still in fall, and there should have been at least some frogs croaking or crickets chirping or even birdsong. But yet, it was eerily silent. I wouldn't have admitted it then, but I was still a little spooked by the tree and corpse encounter, so this wasn't helping ease my mood. When I finally got to the spot again, the sun was starting to set. The dark forest obscured my vision, but I could still see the bright white bark of the birch in the fading light. I set my shovel against a tree, pulled out my flashlight, shook it, and then turned its beam towards the body. Or at least, where the body had been. It was gone now. This puzzled me. It was possible that it had been picked up by a scavenging coyote or something similar, but usually they didn't come this close to the road. It was just another strange occurrence in this whole event. I walked home, still uneasy about the whole situation, but not quite thinking that anything paranormal was afoot. By the next afternoon, I had almost completely forgotten about the incident, and I went on my walk as usual. The day was perfectly pleasant, once again. The slight fall chill made for an enjoyable atmosphere, and I noticed that there were some more Halloween decorations up around the houses. It was all very effective in luring me into a false sense of security. As I reached the wooded road, my memory of the previous night's encounter started to come back. It didn't really impact my mood, but it did make me wrinkle my nose at the thought of the dead rabbit. But nothing too unnerving. At least, not until I looked up ahead and stopped dead in my tracks. There was a motionless pile on the side of the road, another body. I slowly moved up to get a closer look. This time, it was a raccoon. It was lying limply on the asphalt, its limbs twisted and stretched into horrible positions. I noticed something else that stuck with me, but I didn't know what to make of it. It didn't seem to be at all crushed, almost like it had been hit, but not run over. At least, I thought it had been hit. How else could you explain the twisting? A twig snapped. I jerked my head up, scanning for the source of the noise. Looking back, it couldn't have been something other than a squirrel or even another rabbit, but I was starting to get on edge. And that wasn't helped by what I did see. The birch tree. Once again, the raccoon's corpse was laid out directly in front of it. Out of all the other trees, in the last 24 hours, I had seen 2 animal corpses in front of this one birch. Like clockwork. This couldn't have been a coincidence. My mind started racing with all the possibilities, but one thing was clear. There was something to be studied here. I raced back to my house. I needed equipment, and I knew that time was of the essence. But when I made it back to the wooded road, the corpse was once again gone. It had been less than 20 minutes. I knew now that I had to be proactive. The next day, yesterday, I set out on my walk an hour earlier than usual and took my equipment straight to the wooded road. This time, there was no corpse in front of the birch tree. So, I was early. I started setting up measuring equipment, cameras, thermometers, barometers, whatever data I could gather. Paranormal events are unpredictable, after all. Just as I was putting the finishing touches in place, I heard leaves crunching. When I looked up, I saw a doe standing next to the birch tree. It was looking directly at me. I've seen deer before, and usually they look at you, trying to see if you're a threat and all. So, I stayed still and tried to make myself as non-threatening as possible. The doe didn't move. I looked into its eyes and something seemed wrong. It was looking at me, but not in the cautious, wary way most deer did. No, this one didn't even seem afraid. And something else about its gaze, the way its eyes locked on me. There was a kind of hunger there. It made my blood run cold. We both stood still for a very long time, a kind of unspoken staring contest. Every time I thought to move, something about the doe's unblinking gaze stopped me. An image popped into my mind of the way a cat looked at a mouse moments before pouncing. Logically, I had no reason to be afraid of the doe. It couldn't have weighed more than 20 pounds, and they aren't exactly known for their predatory behavior. But still, the image lingered. After what seemed like ages, the doe suddenly started moving. Small at first, like swaying from side to side, but it very quickly grew into something more erratic. It was pacing, legs jumping around, muscles spasming. It started banging its head against the trees, very forcefully too, almost like it was trying to cave its own skull in. The most unsettling thing was how silent this all was. The doe wasn't screeching or moaning. Its mouth was just open as its tongue convulsed and its jaw jerked around. It managed to gain some kind of balance, and as it did, it looked at me one last time. But it wasn't that hungry stare, no. It was more like it was pleading, begging for help. I didn't do anything. I don't know what I could have done, but even if I did, I didn't have time to react. Right after it looked at me that last time, deep, horrible cracking noises rang out as its limbs violently twisted and snapped. It was all I could do not to yell or vomit as the doe's mouth stretched in a silent scream. It all reached a crescendo with something that I can't describe as an implosion or an explosion because that would imply inward or outward motion. It was just as violent as an explosion, but nothing actually exploded. The doe suddenly just wasn't a doe anymore. It was over quickly. The snapping stopped almost as suddenly as it started, and the doe collapsed on a pile in the road, right underneath the birch tree. I don't remember a lot after that. I do know that after I could move again, I sprinted back to my house. When I came back an hour later to retrieve my equipment, the body was, as you probably guessed, gone. None of my equipment was missing though, so I took it home and then tried my hardest to sleep. By this morning, the whole thing seemed distant, almost like a bad dream. But once I reviewed the footage the cameras had caught, it all came flooding back. I saw the doe's episode replay in the same agonizing detail, and I saw it collapse in exactly the same way. But now I realized the camera must have caught what happened to the doe after I ran off. So, I started to watch. In the hour or so after I left, the body lay motionless. Nothing peculiar happened for 30-odd minutes, which just meant that I spent 30 minutes staring at the mangled doe. After that, though, the footage starts to crackle and glitch, and when it finishes, the body is gone. I've gone through the footage countless times, and I've only been able to get a few frames that aren't completely distorted. And out of all of them, there's only one where you can see the doe's carcass. And in that one frame, there's something grabbing it. Something black, unnatural, long. Something that extended itself out of that singular birch tree. I'll investigate this later. For now, I need to rest. Try to make it all make sense. And yeah, that's where it ends. Spooky stuff, right? There are some other notes attached here. Apparently, Uncle Mark didn't find any more animal carcasses under the birch tree after the encounter with the doe. No other investigation could find anything, so he considered it a dead end. I did a little bit of digging myself, now that I live in the modern era with the vast knowledge of the internet at my fingertips. Looking into stuff that makes deer act weird, I found this blog about this thing called chronic wasting disease. Essentially, it's a kind of sickness where once a deer gets it, after about a year or two, it starts to waste away. It doesn't eat or socialize with other deer, stops being afraid of humans, and its behavior generally gets more and more erratic until it just dies. There's no cure, and looking up the results is not for the faint of heart. Fortunately, though, it doesn't seem to be able to be caught by humans. Admittedly, it doesn't explain everything in this story, but there is precedence for weird stuff with animals in non-paranormal contexts. Other questions remain. What about the other animals? Why did they all die in the same spot? And what's the deal with the birch tree? I might want to see if that tree is still around, actually. It's definitely within walking distance, and I've started hearing rumors of dead bobcats showing up in the wooded section of Gossamer Lane. This is Damien Bachman, signing off.
Today's episode of Kingscreek was written and performed by Thomas S. Dennis. It was produced by James Makepeace, and the score was composed by Kai After Kai. Script supervision is provided by James Makepeace and Ryan Kennedy. Our cover art is by Cybergrape UK, and our social media manager is Ryan Kennedy. All episodes are a production of Tracer Magnum Entertainment. If you'd like to support the show, rate and review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Chatbox, or whatever service you use to listen to our show. It helps tremendously and ensures we're seen by more and more of the unsuspecting public. If you'd like to get in touch with us or become involved with the community, join our Discord server or follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr, all under the handle @KingscreekOfficial. Share with your friends, family, or anyone else you want to ensnare in our web. And above all else, thank you for listening.